Today we're going to begin discussing the American Revolution. We will look at the causes, consequences, people of significance, and its lasting effect on history. Before and during the French and Indian War from about 1650 to 1763, Britain essentially left its American colonies to run themselves. They were given relative freedom to do as they pleased. The North American settlers turned to unique forms of government to match their developing new identity as Americans. They were in control of most aspects of their shipping and importation of goods, as well as where they wanted to call home. However, when Britain began tightening regulations, increasing taxes, and becoming more involved in the ins and outs of the colonists began to feel suffocated and to believe their freedoms were melting away. The American Revolution had profound consequences not only for the American colonists, but for the rest of the world as well. Never before had a body of colonists so boldly declared their monarch and government incapable of governing a free people. The Thomas Jefferson penned Declaration of Independence was as unique as it was reasonable, presenting a strong and concise case for the American rebellion against a tyrannical government. Since then, his declaration has been used for the model of many groups and peoples fighting for their own uphill battles. Today, we will begin looking at how the American Revolution began and how it was won by these courageous Americans. The 13 original colonies were located on the eastern shoreline of the New World. These 13 colonies were founded for all different reasons: profit, religious freedom, and spreading the influence of the English crown. However, one thing all of these colonies had in common was their tie to England. All colonies had different interactions with England. The southern colonies were heavily dependent on the export of cotton, while the northern states depended heavily on the importation of goods from England. When the British began creating stricter codes and acts, as well as increasing taxation on the colonies, something that they have never previously experienced, all the colonies were offended, but it was only one colony that won blood for their injustice. That is where we'll begin: Boston, Massachusetts. The scene in Boston in the 1770s was that of great turmoil. The British Crown raised the taxes for the first time in 15 years, and the new regulations on trade and on exports were increased dramatically and was significantly hurting the Boston economy. Boston's economy was based principally on the fact that it was a major harbor for importing and exporting goods to and from Europe. The people in Boston were feeling as if they were not citizens of England, for citizens of England were provided the right of representation in Parliament, while Americans were continually denied. The tension within the city was growing every day. Reports of tar and feathering of local tax collectors, as well as rumblings of fighting the British in the streets if they tried to collect anything else from their pockets. The frustration and the pressure in Boston was growing every day. Some citizens began to publicly criticize the British Crown in print, something that has never previously done before, as well as joining secret societies like the Sons of Liberty. At this point, not one citizen wanted complete detachment from England, but they just wanted England out of their pockets and out of their yards. With all the tension mounting in Boston, the first real conflict began: the Boston Massacre. Since the rumblings and discontent amongst the people in the colonies, England sent more troops than ever to show force. One night, on March 4th, 1770, a group of people were throwing snowballs at an outfitted British troops, and shots were fired. 4 colonists dead. This created an incredible outrage and only encouraged more discontent amongst the colonists, and became a rally cry for independence later. 3 years later, in 1773, with taxation only increasing and without any relief from the Crown, the colonists planned an attack to hit England where they knew it would hurt the most: financially. The colonists began boycotting British tea and eventually planned an attack. The result was the Boston Tea Party. Colonists from Boston dressed as Mohawk Indians to protest the British Tea Act and dumped crates of tea into Boston Harbor. The British reaction was severe and swift. It resulted in the Intolerable Acts and the citizens of Boston paying back the East India Trading Company, to which the tea belonged. Among our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin is the only reason why the Revolution took place. Franklin was already an elderly man and was the most famous person within the colonies itself, and he was known around the world. He was known for his work with electricity and his inventions and his farmer's almanac. Franklin was the leader of the revolutionary movement, speaking publicly, writing editorials, and even going abroad to find support for the American cause. Franklin was the largest influence in gaining public support for the idea of independence. His arguments, articles, and images like Join or Die or Don't Tread on Me were the key reasons to the success of the American Revolution in gaining support. The tension between the colonists and England had been brewing for years, and eventually was going to boil into war. The very first shots fired in the American Revolution were heard in Lexington, Massachusetts in April 1775. The Minutemen, or local militia, forced the British troops back to Boston, where they monopolized the city. This battle pushed the colonists to appoint George Washington commander of the Continental Army. 9 months of fighting, with the colonists losing a significant amount of casualties and the feeling of defeat running rampant throughout the army, a man by the name of Thomas Paine published a pamphlet called Common Sense. This pamphlet laid out reasons why the colonists were fighting for independence, which was so important due to the civil injustice they were fighting. One of the most significant aspects of Common Sense was for the first time the American colonists blamed the king. Previously, the blame was put on Parliament, but was now focused solely on the king. Common Sense was an instant bestseller. It renewed the patriotic spirit within the ranks and encouraged almost 10,000 new recruits for the fight for independence. Without Common Sense's publication, it could be argued that the fight for independence could have ended that very summer. The high patriotic spirit and success that was now beginning from the Continental Army, the Continental Congress wanted to capitalize on the victories and declare independence from the crown officially. Although the idea of declaring independence from England was an act of treason, there were many people who were very uncomfortable with the idea. However, the Continental Congress appointed Thomas Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson took a month to write the document, and then it was then edited by Benjamin Franklin and John Adams before being presented to the Continental Congress. Once presented to the Continental Congress, it was debated and some parts rewritten. The Continental Congress finally, after 3 months of slow deliberation, on July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed. Once signed, horsemen ran throughout the colonies to read the Declaration to the people. They gathered in groups of hundreds and cheered wildly. The signers of the Declaration were from that moment on the most wanted men in the world by the British Crown. The idea of not winning the war for independence was no longer an option, but a necessity. Key women in the fight for independence was Molly Pitcher. During the Battle of Mammoth on June 28, 1778, the fighting was fierce and intense. The heat of battle was searing and the soldiers' throats were parched. Many were exhausted and wounded. All throughout the day, amidst the smoke, the fire, and the fighting, a private's young wife, Mrs. John Hayes, carried a water pitcher back and forth from the well to her husband and his fellow artillerymen. As the battle ensued, Molly's husband was wounded and could not continue, but she knew the job well enough to grab the rammer and keep the gun firing. She served the cannon for the remainder of the battle. She will be and will always be remembered as Molly Pitcher. Another famous female patriot was Betsy Ross. She's best known for making the first American flag. The story is told that she made the flag after her initial visit on June 1776 by George Washington, Robert Morris, and her husband's uncle, George Ross. She demonstrated the gentleman how to cut a five-pointed star with a single clip of the scissors and came up with the design herself with much of the input of George Washington. Continued for another 3 years. The toll of fighting took a significant loss of life and financially on the colonies. Some of the major battles were that of Charleston, Fort Ticonderoga, Saratoga, and the Battle for New York. However, in 1781, Lord Cornwallis surrendered his British army to the Continentals with the help of the French on October 19th at the Battle of Yorktown. The final treaty was signed by England and the United States in 1783, which formally ends the war. Overall, the battle for independence was one of terrible losses and insurmountable odds, but the Americans believed in their cause and fought bravely till the very end. Our forefathers had the ideas and the desire to stand up for what they believed in and face the likelihood of being killed for those very same beliefs. Would you have that same courage? Could you sign a document that would automatically put you at the top of a very short list to be found and handled by the strongest and most powerful military in the world? Well, our forefathers did, and because of their foresight, resilience, and determination, we find ourselves with freedoms that allow us to have the right to a voice and